Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back, everybody. It's the Muslim Metaphysician, and today I'm here to talk to you about something I promised in the last video, and that is the logical problem of the Trinity. Now, in the last video, I explained what the Christian doctrine of the Trinity is, so if you haven't watched that video yet, I suggest that you go back, you pause this video right now, go back, watch that video first to get a general understanding of what the Trinity is and what it means. And then when you're done with that, come back here and watch this video. Okay, so just a reminder though, the doctrine of the Trinity is the notion that there are three divine persons and exactly one God. Now, there is a problem that arises out of the standard doctrine of the Trinity, and that problem is known today as the logical problem of the Trinity. It is also sometimes referred to as the 3-in-1 problem, or also known as the tritheism objection. Okay? The problem arises out of an affirmation of 7 key premises that Christians generally adhere to. Holding to these 7 premises together on the face of it seems to be as logically absurd or incoherent as affirming the existence of a married bachelor or a square circle. So what exactly are these 7 statements and premises? Well, I tried to make it easier for you guys. I got a whiteboard behind me, so I'm going to get up. I'm going to start to read what these 7 statements or premises are that lead to this incoherency in the Trinity, or what's known as the logical problem of the Trinity, and I will explain these statements one by one. Okay, so right here, I have here the logical problem of the Trinity. Now, what actually is it? That's the whole question. Okay, the problem is affirming these 7 statements here. So I hope you guys can see it. I tried to make it nice and colorful and easy for everybody to read. Now, the first statement is that the Father is God. Okay? This is not controversial. None of these 7 statements are controversial for a Trinitarian. Okay? So, the Father is God. The Son is also God. The Holy Spirit is God. That's premise number 3. The Father is not the Son. So the Father and the Son are not the same thing. The Father is also not the Holy Spirit. And then we have premise 6 here. The Son is not the Holy Spirit. Premise 7, there is exactly one God. So once again, the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God. The Father is not the Son. The Father is not the Holy Spirit. The Son is not the Holy Spirit, and there is exactly one God. Now the question is, or what the objection is, how many gods are there? Okay, now the reason why this results in what is known as the logical problem of the Trinity is because the problem essentially is the fact that we have 3 is God statements in which the subjects of the sentences are not identical, and yet we are claiming that there is only one God. It would seem to follow from the first 6 premises that there are exactly 3 gods. Instead, we say that in the 7th premise, there is exactly one God. Now, let me explain what I mean by this. In the first 3 statements, we have the Father is God, so we have 1 is God statement. The Son is God, 2nd is God statement. The Holy Spirit is God, 3rd is God statement. Now, in order to avoid modalism, which is a heresy that the persons are just modes of one person, and there's only one person, standard Trinitarian theology says that the Father is not the Son, the Father is not the Holy Spirit, the Son is not the Holy Spirit. Now, if these 3 aren't the same, and we have each one of them being is God statements, then it looks like we have 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3 is God statements. We have 3 is God statements, not only 1 is God statement. Okay, so the issue arises that we have 3 is God statements. None of these 3 are the same as one another, but yet there's exactly one God. It would seem to follow from these 6 premises that there's not one God, but that there's 3 gods. Okay? Now, I'm going to give an analogy on the other side of my whiteboard to explain what I mean by this. Maybe it'll make it simpler for you guys, and it will give you a better understanding of what exactly the problem is. Okay, so I have here an analogy of the LPT. Okay? Now, here we have Jake is a man, or Jake is man, John is man, James is man. Jake is not John. Jake is not James. John is not James. And number 7, the 7th premise, there is /r, because I'm leaving this open for now, exactly 1 or 3 men or man. Man or men. Okay? So it has the exact same setup, except I've replaced the names. Over here, I've replaced the names. And over here, I've replaced is God for is man. On the 4th, 5th, and 6th premises, I've left it all as the same setup, that the persons are not identical to each other. And then in the 7th premise, I've kept it the same. There is exactly 1 or 3 men. Now the question I have for you folks is, how many men do we have there? Now, typically, if we were to read this apart from considering the Trinity, we would say there are exactly 3 men. But instead, what you have in the Trinity is you would have this same formula. Instead of saying there are 3 men or 3 gods, you have there is exactly 1 man. Now, for us, that seems absurd because our typical way of counting men, or gods in this case, would result in there being 3, not 1. 3 men and not 1 man. Now, I'm going to read for you guys a quote from one of the Cappadocian fathers who was responsible for a lot of the Trinitarian theology that developed, so he's by no means an outsider. And I want to read a quote from him on this issue. It's a little bit of a lengthy quote, but the reason why it's important is because I want you guys to understand that I am not straw-manning the Trinitarian position at all by bringing up this analogy. And you'll see, hopefully, from this quote, exactly that I am not doing that. Now, here's the quote from Gregory of Nyssa. Thus it is that the many have participated in the nature come to be called disciples or apostles or martyrs. But the man in all is one, since, as was said, man is not of the singular, but of the common nature. For Luke is a man, or Stephen is, but it is not the case that if someone is a man, he is also wholly Luke or Stephen. But the logos of the hypostases admits the particularization through the peculiarities seen in them, and is considered according to the synthesis in number. Yet the nature is one, having been unified itself to itself, a strictly indivisible monad, not increased through addition, not decreased through subtraction, but essentially being one and remaining one, even when it manifests in a plurality, indivisible and continuous, and whole and not divided together with those particulars participating in it. Now here's the key part. If you haven't fallen asleep by now, here's the key part of the quote that goes with the analogy for you guys to understand why I drew this analogy. And in just the way that a people or an army or a church is said in the singular in every case, yet each of these is conceived to be in plurality. So according to the more precise account, man would be said strictly to be one. Remember in the case of Stephen and Luke, he's saying that they would strictly be considered one. The whole of humanity would be strictly be considered one man. So according to the more precise account, man would be said strictly to be one, despite those displayed in the same nature being in plurality. So despite that we have John as a man, James as a man, and Jake as a man, despite us having this, we're all considered one man by the fact that we all possess exactly the same human nature. This is his argument. So it's called the unity of nature argument, that given the fact that we all possess the same nature, we all have the same human nature, there's only one man. Even though there are three particular instances of man, he's saying it would still be fair to say that there's only one man. Then he goes on further to say, thus it would be much better to correct our erroneous habit so as no longer to extend a plurality the name of the nature than by our bondage to habit to transfer to our statements concerning God the error which exists in the above case. Now some of you are sitting there saying, well, Jake, what is going on here? What is Gregory talking about? Well, he's talking about exactly what I just said on the board about the three men or the one man. He's saying in this case, there's only one man, not three men. Okay? Now, if that doesn't seem absurd on the face of it, I'll give a quote from someone else who comments on this, on what Gregory had to say, and that's Richard Cartwright. He comments on this passage from Gregory saying, and I quote, "It seems to have been left to Gregory of Nyssa, who we just quoted, Basil's younger brother, it was his brother, to notice that, thus understood, consubstantiality of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit appears to license saying that there are three gods." So it appears that if they're all of the same substance, it seems we have three gods. But he says, Gregory himself rather desperately suggested that strictly speaking, there is only one man. So his point is, in order to get out of the three gods problem, or the logical problem of the Trinity, Gregory draws the analogy of man, Jake, John, and James, and instead of just saying that, well, it's just obviously the case that there's three men, he literally says there's only one man in an attempt to solve the LPT, or the logical problem of the Trinity. Now, guys, whether or not Gregory can be read more charitably than Cartwright suggests is not my point at all. My point is that my analogy drawn on the board about men in the 7 statements earlier is not an absurd analogy when using it to explain the logical problem of the Trinity. It's not at all. In fact, Gregory himself did this. This is not unique to me at all. Now, there are undoubtedly other premises that most Trinitarians are committed to, such as the idea that the Father is uncaused, the Son is the only begotten, and that the Spirit proceeds from either the Father alone or from the Father through the Son. However, these additional premises are unnecessary for evaluating the 7 premises mentioned earlier. We may, however, discuss these premises in subsequent videos regarding other problems with the Trinity that aren't directly related to these premises. So I hope that this video served as a brief explanation of what the logical problem of the Trinity is. I drew an analogy that is also from the Church Fathers to explain this, and on the face of it, the inconsistency is the absurdity of saying that the original 6 premises, and I'm just going to go back to it one more time for clarity's sake, that the original 6 premises, that the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God, the Father is not the Son, the Father is not the Holy Spirit, the Son is not the Holy Spirit. The absurdity or the inconsistency is affirming these 6 statements and then saying there's exactly one God instead of what appears to be the obvious case that there are 3 gods. Now, there has been a lot of work done on the logical problem of the Trinity in the past, going all the way back to Gregory of Nyssa, all the way up until now in the field of contemporary analytic philosophy by Christian philosophers. listing out what this problem is, trying to solve it in a way that is coherent and yet historically and biblically faithful to the Christian faith. And it appears very difficult to do so. There's a lot of things that we have to consider. But I hope, once again, that this video will serve as an explanation of what the logical problem of the Trinity is. Now that we understand what the doctrine of the Trinity is, what the logical problem of the Trinity is that results from these 7 premises, we can, in the future, inshallah, take a look at some historical and contemporary, especially contemporary models of the Trinity that attempt to solve this problem, because there are all different models that are proposed nowadays by Christian philosophers that attempt to be faithful to these 7 premises and yet avoid what appears to be the logical absurdity of saying that there's only one God when it appears that there should be 3 gods. So in the future, we're going to take a look at these models, go through them one by one, and analyze whether or not they are able to solve the logical problem of the Trinity without falling into heresy and other perceived problems. So yeah, some of the people that we may be taking a look at are people that you may be familiar with, like Dr. William Lane Craig, maybe Richard Swinburne, Brian Leftow, Dr. Bo Branson, who I have debated recently, and several others, but that should suffice now for you guys to be familiar with what I am going to speak about. Once again, if you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you enjoyed the video and wish to see more content like it in the future. And it's really important that you guys do so. Please show some support and love, and subscribe and share the channel, because I'm sure there are plenty of other people that you know that may be interested in this content. Until next time, guys, assalamu alaikum.